Hey, what's up, DLLS Mavs Nation? It's your man, Kevin Gray, alongside Mavericks analyst Bobby Carella. We, of course, are DLLS Mavs. Really appreciate you joining us here on our emergency podcast. The breaking news for the Dallas Mavericks ahead of their game tonight with the Minnesota Timberwolves is that their center, their sophomore sensation, Dereck Lively II, has sustained a small fracture in his foot and is expected to miss the next 2 to 3 months. As reported by ESPN. Of course, Lively has been out since January the 14th with what has been described as an ankle injury. Unfortunately, the news coming just about 25 minutes ago that Lively is, in fact, dealing with a fracture in his foot, which means he will be out for the next 2 to 3 months. We really appreciate you joining us here on DLLS Sports as we have our Mavericks analyst, Bobby Carella, and our Mavericks beat writer, Tim Cato, as we break this all down at what has been, unfortunately, in a lot of ways, gentlemen, and Bobby, I'll start with you here, a season from hell in a lot of ways when it comes to the injury front for this team. Unfortunately, yet another, no pun intended, bad break for the Dallas Mavericks when it comes to Dereck Lively this time dealing with this foot injury.
Yeah, every single day something happens to make this situation worse. Like – we thought, okay, Luke is going to be out for a little bit. No, he's actually going to be reevaluated in a month. And also Kyrie's going to get hurt. Kyrie's going to come back, but then Lively's going to get hurt. He'll only be out for maybe a couple weeks. Nah, he is going to miss maybe the rest of the regular season because 2 months from now is March 22nd. The Mavs' last game of the year is 2 or 3 weeks after that. If he misses 3 months, he's not only missing the regular season, he's probably missing the first round. This is the worst day of my life, KG and Tim. I don't want to over exaggerate, but I don't think it can get any worse than this.
I mean, gut feeling right now. Is this team? I guess the question is this. The question is not like, oh my God, are you going to go tank? Like everybody's thought is going to be like, are you going to lose games? Are you going to tank all this? That's not the right way to phrase that question. You start with this. Is it realistic for the Dallas Mavericks to make a championship run this season? Is there any realistic hope right now that you see for Lively to come back near or, in the first round? Dallas during this time, and again, one thing to remember is that Dallas might be a play-in team. So that means Dereck Lively might miss play-in games that you could just lose, especially if you have one and done, if you got to win 2 to get in. Like that's a possibility. So do you see any scenario where Dallas can put things together in the right time when Luka is back, when Kyrie is, dealing with his back injury, but, playing most of the games without Lively, and likely in this scenario with a move at the deadline? But does that scenario exist?
No.
No. I don't believe so. We have seen the importance of Dereck Lively when he has been on the floor, the difference that he makes offensively, but more so defensively. And with this team and the way that they go about running pick and roll, obviously the lob threat that Dereck Lively is, he is the best center to give you a chance to run as efficient of a defense and an offense as you want. And if he's not going to be available, I don't see realistically how this team makes the kind of championship run that they desire to based off of the way that this team is built.
I mean, here's the thing.
I don't think it's likely. I still think there are paths where everything works out and the team is, maybe not in its best form, but is healthy or more or less healthy with a 6 seed. Now, this would require trades at the deadline. This would require players coming in. This would require a Gershon Yabusele, a Duop Reith, Ben Simmons if he gets bought out. Like there has to be somebody else as a backup center, as a big man, somebody coming in at the 4. I don't think the team, and I don't know. I haven't talked to anybody on the team yet. I mean, it's way too early to truthfully know what they're thinking. I'm not yet convinced the team thinks that the season would be just my gut feeling says the team doesn't think this season is cooked. And then you run this very difficult situation of how do you play but not overextend players on injuries without outright, tanking or without outright, when that might just be the scenario. I don't know.
The problem is that they don't just need a backup center; they need a starting center because Gafford just is not a starting center. He's not. He does not align with the way that they want to play. The way they want to play is with Dereck Lively at the 5, a switchable big that can run the floor, that can rebound the ball. Their rim protection numbers are not really good when Gafford is on the floor. Their rebounding numbers are terrible when Gafford is on the floor, and they have to play a very inflexible scheme because Gafford is not a switching big. He's just not. He's a drop big, and that is not the way to defend in order to win a title. Like, you're not beating OKC playing that way. You're not beating the Celtics playing that way. We have evidence of that. Gafford was the second best big on the team by a mile all throughout last playoff run, even against teams like the Wolves and Clippers that had non-shooting bigs. More teams have shooting bigs now. You're going to have to go not only through the Thunder, but through a road series against the Thunder in order to get out of the West. And you might have to play them in the first round now, not in the conference finals. So, the domino effect of this is very steep. But, I think the real problem is, Matt Moore, HP Basketball, famous Mavs hater, right? Everyone knows. He had a really good tweet earlier today that was not about the Mavs, but he said 76 of the 78 NBA champions were a top 3 seed in their conference. That's a lot. Okay, that means 2 teams that weren't a top 3 seed have won the title. The Mavs in 2011, when they won, were the number 3 seed, and they were considered a dark horse team. This year's Mavs team will be lucky to be top 6. They will more than likely be a 7 or 8 seed if they even make the dance. Now, if they're full health, I believe that they can beat anybody, but it means they're going to have to go. They're going to be the road team in every single series they play once again. And last season's playoff run, I believe they were the better team in most of the series that they played. It was still historically unlikely for them to be the road team, the underdog in a series every single time and still win. It's just really, really hard to do it that way because every game 7 is going to be on the road. Every game 1 is going to be on the road. Even if you're the better team, it's tough to do that. It's tough to win games away from home. And now the Mavs are almost guaranteed to be a road team in every series they play, unless there's some other historic upset somewhere else. So the deck is really stacked against them if they can even make it that far.
In any scenario where Dallas is able to salvage the season, it comes from this 2 to 3 month timeline, and specifically that it's much, much, much closer to 2 months. We've seen foot injuries like broken bones. This is not what is it, Liz Frank? This is a fracture of as far as we understand the injury, it's a small fracture, which is not as serious as some broken bones in foot injuries that you can have. But we've seen, especially young big men, miss entire seasons because they broke a bone in their foot.
Foot injuries with big men are very scary. Foot injuries with big men are scary.
So if there's any, if Dallas has any concern that this is going to turn into a season-ending injury, that's when there is zero question that there is any path to, a championship this year. There isn't. If Dereck Lively's not on the court, there is not a path. And so that leaves you with the very difficult situation of how do you approach the rest of the regular season when you have a team that's window is, intentionally shortened, artificially shortened by the moves Dallas has made over the past couple of years. And they do want to, it's hard not to play them. But both have injuries right now, and that is something that could be extended. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to imagine quite how to juggle that, but it does seem like unless there is total optimism around the team that Dereck Lively's injury will be, should be a 2-month situation, unless there's total optimism that he would be back, quite frankly, for a potential play-in game. I think that's the mindset that you have to have. Unless you have a lot of optimism, that's the case, then yeah, I do think the best case scenario is that this team does not have a path to the finals and thus does not need to prioritize making the playoffs, because the ultimate goal of this team at this moment of their window is to win a championship. And if that is off the table because of Dereck Lively, then yeah, you start looking pragmatically at what you can do, what is best for the team to win a championship in this window. And this window extends longer than the season. It doesn't extend much longer, but it does extend longer than this season.
Let's get to the super chat from Martin the Polar Bear, the $5 super chat. He says, we'll naturally lose too many games to make the play-in with Lively out. Our defense will look similar to how it was in 22-23. Got to keep our pick. Well, I guess the good news in some ways, I guess I'm thinking about 21-22 when they went to the Western Conference Finals, so not necessarily 22-23. I was trying to find some copium there. I couldn't find it. My bad, Martin. There's nothing there. My bad. It's funny that comment has been brought up because, ironically, this morning I was looking at NBA Tankathon, which, my gosh, the fact that I'm looking at NBA Tankathon when we are, 43 games of the season is kind of wild. But, of course, there are 14 lottery picks, okay? Right now, Minnesota, who the Mavericks play tonight, is 22-21. They are currently right now 14th when you look at NBA Tankathon at 22-21. The Mavericks sit right now at 19 at 23-20. So they're one game out of it in terms of the loss column. There will be natural conversations, gentlemen, about where this team's direction will be relative to what is a loaded draft class in 2025. And Tim, to your point, about being pragmatic about the approach of this team, not just for this year, but for the future, there is a potential quote-unquote natural path, if you will, to what would be the NBA lottery. I don't know if we're necessarily ready to have that discussion yet, but a lot of Mavericks fans will be in that mode. We've already seen capture the flag photos start to show up with Cooper Black in Mavericks uniforms, with the idea being that might be the approach that needs to be taken going forward here.
Yeah, but it's, Dallas is still going to win games. I mean, the idea that, yes, I mean, if they miss the playoffs, they would have a chance to be number one. The idea, obviously, is much more.
Oh, I'm not saying they're going to be number one. I'm just saying the
right.
being in the lottery is there.
I mean, I think I think that it's realistic to look at this Dallas Mavericks team and say already that it was going to be very difficult for them to win the championship without one more piece, one more addition, maybe two more additions. That's something I have done on this show, at times. I do think that this team is a little bit light when it comes to perimeter defending, is a little bit light when it comes to, having 5 players you absolutely trust to be on the floor to close games. 4, yes, but that 5th player has been missing a little bit. It's really hard to know who it is, and it might not be somebody on the roster. So if you already had some questions about this team and whether they had the ability to, win a championship, I don't think Dallas, maybe they had some doubts, but, I would have said fully healthy that this team had a chance to win the championship, but maybe they would need to go into the summer and reload and come back, and then the situation, they would be able to finally add the, whatever small things they were missing that would kind of bridge the gap from them to, the absolute contenders in this league. And so maybe it's something that happens in the draft, or maybe it's something that having a lottery pick that you could trade gets you closer to being able to fill that absence on the roster. So all of that is nice and good, but what do you do when Luka's ready to come back? What do you do when Kyrie Irving is still playing through his back injury?
Yeah, I mean they're not gonna be like, oh well, time to fold up the tents right now. It's just not gonna happen. That's not realistic. It's not practical. Even if they lost every single game of the season from here on out, they have 23 wins right now. If they go 23-59, they might not even get a top 5 pick. There are a lot of atrociously bad teams in the league. The Mavs are currently 8 games ahead of Philly, and Philly is 8th right now. So, it's just not going to happen. You could lose a ton of games and still not even get a top 10 pick. And so that is even worse, because then you're just signaling to everybody, we don't give an F, and it's not even going to help you. It's just not going to happen. So any sort of philosophical, intentional front office driven decision to pack it in is not going to happen until mid to late March.
Yeah,
in the interim,
2 years ago they tanked for 2 games.
Yeah,
everything else was organic tanking. They were just that bad of a roster, and they had a lot that went very unfortunate that season.
Yeah, no, this team is better than that team for sure.
Right.
I'm not sure now with Lively out. I'm not sure how much better it is, but it's definitely better. And their schedule does get pretty soft here in the next couple of weeks, around the time that we expect Luka to get back. So there is a chance they're going to mount some sort of push. I think that right now with the way that this organization is set up, it just doesn't make any sense to just lose. It just doesn't. And if the prognosis is closer to 2 months than 3, then you get Lively back for April, and maybe you can get him into shape before any sort of play-in or first-round series as the 5 or the 6 seed. So it's possible. I don't think that they're going to use this injury to inform any other moves that they're going to make. There's no point in going out to trade for a starting caliber center because you already have one, unless the player that you're going to trade for that starting caliber center is Dereck Lively. But I don't think that's going to happen. I'm not sure that that's not going to happen, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think that they
wouldn't go trade for a center, but would you go trade for an upgraded backup 4, a upgrade to Maxey, who is somebody who can also, since Lively's going to be out, be forced into duty as a backline. You wouldn't trade for a player who couldn't share the floor with, you wouldn't prioritize players, that might come up in the buyout market that are not players who couldn't, who you couldn't play next to Dereck Lively. But if Dallas is trying to salvage the season, it does put a lot more emphasis on the idea that you have to have a much better backup 4 than what the team has right now.
That was the case before, though. I mean, it's even more so now. It's just the problem is, this team, the way it's built, is not built to defend the way that they do when Gafford is on the floor. First off, it's not conducive to winning, and that's no slight to Gafford. It's just the limitations of his body. He's just not quick enough to switch and guard guards. They're not built to defend that way, and also that way is not conducive to winning. So they're going to be square peg, round hole for the rest of the season if he remains the starter. So it almost doesn't even matter. It almost, not in like a nihilistic way, but fundamentally, philosophically, when it comes to building a team, it does not matter. You can go and trade for a guy that could fit with Lively, but in the meantime, that guy's going to have to fit with Gafford, and that just doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. That type of player does not exist. And so I'm not hopeless. It's just they're not going to be playing the Mavericks basketball that they want to be playing for the rest of the season. Very much like they did in 22-23. That's not the way they wanted to defend. That's not the kind of roster that they wanted to have. But it's what they ended up with, and it looked disgusting for a lot of the season. And that's unfortunately, I think our hopes of the Mavs finishing even top half, let alone top 10 in defensive rating, died about 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, and I guess I'll be that guy today. The basketball guys are clearly sending a message, it feels like, to this team, the way that the injury situation has gone about the way so far this year. And sometimes when you're an organization that's been put into a position like this, sometimes you might need to take the hint. And obviously this team, especially its superstar, is too competitive to get out here and smoke games for the sake of smoking games for a potential, being potentially in the lottery at all. The likelihood of getting a number 1 pick is not there. This team is going to win too many games for that to happen. But to be in the top 14, that is still a possibility. And this team might not be good enough, even with what it has available to it, to not win enough games to even be in that position, or win enough games to be in that position. So the question now for me is, what now happens going forward here? Because Daniel Gafford is going to be your starting center going forward. He's not moving at the trade deadline. You can't afford to move him. How does this team start to look and play once Luka comes back, hopefully knocking the rust off fairly quickly once he does, but also a team that has to help manage a 32-year-old player in the 14th year of his career with a back injury that he has publicly said is a bulging disc in his back. What is the next step for this team and how they go about playing night in and night out, knowing that they won't have Lively going forward here?
You got to try and win. I mean, they're going to try. You play out the rest of the season. You just have to. You play out the rest of the season. If you stumble into the 12th pick, cool, I guess. That pick is about as valuable as a $20 bill this summer.
It did net him Dereck Lively II at 12.
Yeah, and that was a massive victory. You look at the track record of what happens at 12. Like, you're better off using it than trading it at that point in the draft.
Yeah, so, I think 12 is much more valuable than 24 when you're looking realistically at the.
Sure. Yeah. If you're trying to trade for, star player X this summer, the 12th pick is meaningless.
Correct. Basically, yeah. When I said, does Dallas still view itself as having, or does Dallas think it is realistic that this team can either avoid the play-in or it can have Dereck Lively back for the play-in games? If it doesn't mean Dallas tanks. Obviously, this is not a team that could do that. It's not a team set up to do that. You don't tank with veterans in your, in the 30s, in their 30s. What you do is you have so much more caution, and when it comes to Luka and Kyrie's injuries, and you just emphasize the fact that nothing that happens this season can diminish the health of those two players going into next season, because that's when you have now reorientated your franchise focus to maximizing your chances to win a championship next year. So that's really what Dallas has to decide. If they still feel they have a 5% chance to win the championship this year, they're going to go for it, and they're going to maximize it this year. I think Daryl Morey has said that before, that, you should go all in if you think you have a 5% chance. That is a big enough chance that is worth going for it. Most teams do not get a 5% chance, 5% chance to win the championship. They might not get it for 5 years. 5% is a realistic outcome. Dallas thinks they have 5. If they think they have 10% chance, a 10% chance of getting through the West, everything working out, then they should still go for it. If you think you have less than that, again, it's not tanking, but it is maximizing next year at the expense of, a loss, a game, a regular season game here or there in March that, Luka or Kyrie maybe could play in, but shouldn't.
Yes, this is fine as it's burning around everywhere. It feels like for this team. DFW injuries have just snake bitten their franchises over the last 12 to 14 months. It's just kind of, I had to say that real quick. It's just ironic how the Cowboys, the Rangers, the Mavericks have all been going through, even the Stars are losing Tyler Sagan as well. The injury bug has just bitten the 4 major franchises over the last 12 to 14 months. If you're a DFW sports fan who cares outside of the Mavericks,
the uncomfortable truth of, Tim, what you were saying is what maximizes your chance to win, not just this year, but also next year. The uncomfortable truth is Luka maximizes your chances to win at any point. And is he going to be 100% in 2 weeks or a month or 3 months if he's playing?
Will he make the rest of the season, let alone the ideal scenario?
Dude's been hurt. He's been limping for 4 years. We need to understand that. He's been limping since COVID, since you were locked in your living room. Again, they're not going to make any sort of choices until March. If it comes down to getting real nasty and taking on a fine, if they're going to get fined for what the Brooklyn Nets have been doing for 3 years, then that's not going to be decided until March. But if they lose 7 in a row before he comes back, then the choice becomes a little easier to make, and proceeding with caution, is definitely gonna win the day.
That would be an interesting conversation to broach, because we know famously how he felt about the Mavericks, even what they did to eventually get Dereck Lively. He was not thrilled about the way the rest of that season ended, even with the success of getting Lively in the draft a little bit later on.
Real quick. I'm sorry, KG.
Mm-hmm.
Roblox Gamer says we don't have a 2-center punch. Means a lot more to Dwight Powell. Powell's out now too.
Yeah.
Who knows when he's coming back? He's got a hip strain. Their centers right now are Daniel Gafford.
That's it.
I'm not frozen. That's it. Maxey, I guess, is your backup 5 and your backup 4. If Maxey's your backup 5, then your backup 4 is Kessler Edwards, who has this many made shots this season as a Dallas Maverick in a whole lot more minutes than this. Or your backup 4 is Omax, who one day plays like Draymond and the next day plays like Draymond on a bad day.
I should bring this stat up again, because we've cited it plenty of times on on alldlls.com and on the show in the past. But the difference between Dereck Lively and Daniel Gafford is that when Dereck Lively is on the court, I probably should use NBA stats for this. It's a cleaner way of showing the difference. You want to talk for 1 second, Bobby?
Yeah, I'll just go back to last season's playoffs again, because if this team is built to win a title, then we need to judge them through that lens. Yeah. Last season in the playoffs, when Lively was on the floor, the Mavs were +9 per 100 possessions. When Daniel Gafford was on the floor, the Mavs were -5.4 points per 100 possessions. In the playoffs, against teams that you will be playing again this year in the playoffs, including one team, OKC, that is much better than it was last season when you but when you beat them in the playoffs with a lot of close games where every single point matters. That is a 14.5 point swing per 100 possessions between just those two guys.
And if you think that's just the playoffs, well, this season, Dereck Lively is, when he's on the court, Dallas beats teams by 8.1 points per 100 possessions. When Daniel Gafford is on the court, Dallas loses 1.3 points per 100 possessions.
That's
so
more
this
than
is not
9
just that's a swing of 9 points. It's not just a scenario where Daniel Gafford struggles specifically against like the top tier playoff teams. And now he's a good player. And he struggles because Dallas has a very specific scheme that requires him to do things that, would need him to do things for them to succeed that he cannot do. But Dereck Lively is on the verge of being a great player, and that's the difference. And he is a perfect fit for what Dallas needs to do, not just because they've chosen that defensive scheme, because it is the best version, it is the best defensive scheme they can choose when they have lineups that are made up of Kyrie and Luka. So this is what Dallas is looking at. They're not comparable players to what Dallas does, and yeah, it's going to get a lot more difficult. This is, the regular season is going to get a lot more difficult.
Tinfoil hat.
This is not. Yeah.
Can I do a tinfoil hat moment and do some reckless speculation?
Did you just shorten reckless speculation?
I did.
That's a lot of people say that.
No, they do not.
It's a new thing. I'll take credit for that. Recky specky.
Do not.
A little Recky specky, since our guy Mark Stein isn't here to say, "Don't you do that? That is so dumb, Bobby. Don't say that." If we understand that the Mavs are worse with Gafford on the floor than Lively on the floor, if we also accept that it does not make sense to pay a backup center $13 to $14 million, if we also accept that the Mavs likely are not going to make the playoffs at this point, and if we likely expect that what that means is that at some point Luka and Kyrie won't be playing. Come here. Should the Mavs just trade Gafford for somebody that's hurt right now that could help them win next season that plays in New Orleans? That trading for him yesterday might not have made as much sense, but trading for him now, maybe even overpaying for him now, makes a lot more sense.
So you willing to smoke away the 2 first-round picks you got to go get a guy who's got a torn labrum right now?
If you trade Gafford and your 2025 first-round pick for a guy that is about to not play at all either, maybe that's enough because that 2025 pick becomes pretty good. That's so much Recky specky. I'm just saying, but that's like, okay. I got the idea from, I want to find the comment from Andrew Cause, diehard Andrew, by the way. Why not trade Gafford for a player more similar to Lively if he doesn't fit what Dallas wants to do? If Gafford doesn't fit what you want to do and you're already going to lose, then maybe just trade for a guy that'll help you win next year.
And
that's right.
Kind of the player that's more similar to Dereck Lively.
Whispering part, yes.
The player more similar to Dereck Lively isn't really going to be a center, because there's like 7 centers in the league who replicate essentially what Dereck Lively does, and all of them are so valuable that they are paid and they are played as starting centers, as 30 minutes per game centers or more. And so, yeah, Dallas isn't, there are not players who, you're not going to go find a better backup center realistically. Someone who fits the style better than what, than Daniel Gafford. Daniel Gafford is the prototype backup center because he doesn't scale up to starting center. So,
yeah, that's important. Yeah. Like Kevin asked, it's crazy the hate you guys have for Gafford. It's not hate. I mean, it's just reality. Like, it's really hard to argue with a 15-point swing in the playoffs between Lively and Gafford. And again, it's not because Gafford is bad. It's because Lively is that good. That's what makes this such a bummer. That's why we're doing an emergency pod about it, because like he fits the way they want to defend. He's 20. He makes 1/3 of the money, and he's got enormous upside. He's already this good, and he could become even better with more playing time. Gafford at this point in his career kind of is what he is. He's not as fast-footed as Lively, meaning he can't switch and guard on the perimeter, which is what they want to do. The big advancement the Mavs were able to make this year is that they could switch more, have Lively play out more, so they're dropping less, thereby conceding fewer open jumpers, fewer drives to the rim, and all that stuff. None of that is the case the way that Gafford is built to defend. It just is what it is. This isn't me dumping on the guy. It's just the reality. And eye test and stats both back it up. It's just that's how it is. When you play drop, you defend worse, you rebound less, you force fewer turnovers. All of those things are true. Like, it's just them's the breaks, you know?
Yeah, and this isn't just about counting numbers. This isn't about career highs of 7 blocks and 31 points. Like, we're talking about philosophically how this team wants to play night in and night out. Gafford does not play the style that the Mavericks want to play night in and night out defensively, especially to increase their ceiling. Of course, the Mavericks take on the Minnesota Timberwolves tonight, and for the two of you, when it comes to the injury report, it is quite lengthy going into tonight's game. Now, of course, with the news of Dereck Lively being out, Luka Doncic obviously is out, Dante Exum remains out, Quentin Grimes remains questionable. He's dealing with back spasms. Jaden Hardy, he's out again as he's dealing with the right ankle sprain. We know the status now of Dereck Lively II. Najee Marshall is questionable tonight with illness again. So we will see if he plays tonight. Dwight Powell's out.
How is he sick again?
Look, I don't even want to laugh.
Get that man some white blood cells.
Yeah, because it's getting a little frightening. I'm not gonna lie to you. And then Klay Thompson is also questionable tonight with a left ankle sprain. So it already low key felt like they were about to smoke tonight's game again against the Minnesota Timberwolves to try to prepare to take on the Oklahoma City Thunder on the second night of a back-to-back. It gets that much more difficult, obviously, with the news that Dereck Lively is going to be out. So there's a lot.
Fascinated to figure out when this was found out, because Dereck Lively was listed as questionable also.
He has been listed questionable since, the last few games with the ankle sprain. Of course, he's been out since January the 14th. But, yeah, to your point, he's been listed as questionable the last –
He was listed as questionable this morning coming into the game, and then,
that's
3
right.
hours later, it was announced he was going to be out 2 to 3 months. That's very interesting.
Kid got pretty cryptic the other day, though, right? Didn't he say, he's going to be out a while?
He did say that he was a ways away from coming back. But, again, that was on the basis of what we thought was an ankle sprain, not a broken foot.
They probably – if I had to guess – I think they knew about it a couple days ago.
I would tend to agree.
They had a long weekend off in Dallas, and they probably knew.
But that's kind of the lay of the land.
But he's also been walking around without a boot. That is not your typical reaction. Again, maybe this is one where it is in the part of the foot that just doesn't need that. But I wouldn't say that how he's been treating it, being around the team. I believe he was on the road with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It's described as a small fracture, which, I studied feet bones in college for 14 years. So I'm something of a foot expert. But it feels like if it's a small
Quentin
fracture,
Tarantino.
Yeah, it feels like if it's a small fracture, it is one of those things that there's really nothing you can do but just kind of sit around. And maybe a boot doesn't really help, but playing could make it worse. Maybe it's one of those things, but also that's Recky Specky too. All right.
Enough with the Recky Specky. We will have our pregame show at 5:45 p.m. Despite Bobby wanting to pause the NBA season, we will have our pregame show at 5:45 p.m. tonight.
That's a lie, G2. That's a lie. But I'm better than that. Not to shame. I'm not shaming anybody, but I'm not. I would not confess to such a thing on the internet.
So join us at 5:45 p.m. tonight. We will have we will have a watch along tonight. We will watch a version of the Mavericks play the Minnesota Timberwolves tonight with our guy Jesse Holley of the DLLS Cowboys podcast. Hell, he might have to go suit up at this rate, based on the way the injuries are piling up for the Dallas Mavericks.
We agreed to do a watch along yesterday, and then this happens today. We're the worst. We are the worst.
The curse of the watch along continues when it comes to us in this basketball.
I'm leaving
team.
y'all. Yeah, we've got a lot more work to do later today.
But we really appreciate you joining us here on the DLLS Mavs Emergency Podcast. Again, the breaking news: Dereck Lively II expected to miss the next 2 to 3 months with a fracture in his foot, having been sidelined since January the 14th with the ankle injury. Now has turned, unfortunately, into something much worse for this team. We will have much more with our national NBA insider Mark Stein during our post-game show as well with the up-to-date latest information when it comes to Dereck Lively and this injury situation for the Mavericks. That is our Mavericks beat writer, Tim Cato. That is our Mavericks analyst, Bobby Carella. I'm your host, Kevin Gray. Really appreciate you joining us here on the DLLS Mavs Emergency Pod here on DLLS Sports. We'll talk to you at 5:45. Y'all be good. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.